Hello my dear friends, how is it going? I'm Mari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Viking Christian Berserkers. Berserk here. Right, so this seems a bit odd. It was odd enough to me. I've recently received a couple of questions, a lot of questions actually, if Viking Christian Berserker existed. I was at a loss, not because I didn't know how to answer these questions, because, as you might imagine, Christian Berserker never existed. At least there's absolutely no evidences for it. But I was at a loss because it's too many people asking the same thing and I didn't know where this was coming from. Like, what the hell is going on here? Quick Google search and I found out this had to do with the TV series Vikings Valhalla. I think this is on Netflix, which I don't have, but there's always a way. So I have watched it and now I get where these doubts and questions are coming from. Right, so Viking Christians existed. Viking Christians, right? But Christian Berserker or Christian Berserkers or Berserker Christians is purely fantasy. I don't think I need to go through the term Viking all over again because I have already made a video about it. And if you have the time, of course, please do watch that one if you haven't already. But, of course, it isn't strange, the existence of Christian Vikings, because the term Viking doesn't denote a pagan or at least a non-Christian person. It wasn't a term to designate ethnicity, creed, or religion, but more on a social level, an activity. Basically, everyone could be a Viking, and as we shall see further ahead, there were literally Viking Christian kings from Norway who have played a very important role in the spread of Christianity in Scandinavia. Although, once again, I take the opportunity to say that the term Viking is quite misleading and doesn't give us a proper understanding of the Scandinavian Middle Ages, because Vikings did not call themselves Vikings. It wasn't a thing. It was a term with many different connotations, usually used to refer to piracy and pirates. More on those terms. I've talked about the word Viking, Old English, and Vikinger in Old Icelandic, which, by the way, Vikinger could be applied to any pirate regardless of where they came from, which period, and what language they spoke. Vikings could be literally anyone being a pirate from anywhere, but both terms used very differently, meaning something like pirate. Being Viking was more of a job or description of occupation at best, rather than an ethnicity. No point going through that all over again. The point here is that a Viking sorry, could indeed be pagan, Christian, both at once, Muslim even, whatever person taking on piracy and disturbing others who very much called them Viking or Vikinger. Regardless of background, religion and ethnicity, people were Viking according to what they did in the eyes of those who met them, and a certain conduct linked to maritime activities would earn them the label Viking, Vikinger, Viking. Moving on. Now, another thing is Christian Berserkers, Berserkir. So, in the first season of the series Vikings Valhalla, and the proper name would be Valhalla, but that's a matter for another video. Well, the first season, it brings to the scene several characters who are dominated or designated as Berserkers, Berserker Christians, promoting a kind of religious war against the Nordic pagans. Berserkir are described in literary sources as fanatical and fearless warriors. The Icelandic sagas built a literary model that is sometimes positive and sometimes negative about these semi-legendary characters. That regardless of the debate whether they were really historical figures or not, the sources describe them only as champions of paganism and the cult of Odin. Odin is the only deity that came to be associated with the Berserkir. I've already made a video about the Berserkir and Hulfednar, where I have delved deeper into this subject, and indeed the evidences we have at our disposal, it is very hard to perceive to what extent goes the veracity of these semi-legendary warriors. But that's not the point now. The point is that there's nothing in the surviving sources that point to the existence of Christian berserker, Christian berserkers. Doesn't even make sense, since that's really a pagan thing per se. And we know at least that any religious connotation the berserker have had, it was to the cult of Odin alone. But not everything here is a fantasy adapted for television, and there is a historical content behind this religious fanaticism in this series and by these characters. The figure of Jarl Ker and his band of misfits was certainly inspired by other Nordic warriors who dedicated themselves to the fight for Christianization, to promote Christianization. From the top of my head, and assuming that the directors of this TV series indeed based themselves on some historical evidences for the creation of Viking Christian Berserker, and in particular for the figure of Jarl Ker and his violent behaviors and religious fanaticism. From the top of my head, historical figures such as the King Olaf Tryggvason, which I don't think it is necessary for now at least to talk about him. As you know, the sources really speak of Olaf Tryggvason as a bloodthirsty Christian, and he was really into it. It was either convert or die a most painful death. There was Håkon Haraldsson, 10th century, also known as Håkon the Good, but goodness here clearly depends on the perspective, because if this was being good, I can't imagine what type of people must be in the Christian hell. This is something I have talked about before. King Håkon I of Norway, the third king of Norway and ruling in the 10th century, was trying to force the heathens or the remaining pagans into Christianity, just like his father. So it was this king who moved Yule to the same date as Christmas, which was then held on the solstice on the Julian calendar at December the 21st. We are talking about the man responsible for changing the calendar of the yearly pagan festivities, and for instance of Yule, right, and place it on a fixed date, which later on changed again. No point in going through that all over again. So if you have the time, also watch that video on the heathen holidays, and thank you in advance. Now, his father, Harold Fairhair, the first king of Norway, King Harald I, 9th century of the Common Era, of course. We are talking about the very king of Norway, who is one of the main reasons why Norwegians ran away and colonized Iceland. And they were also very much seeking to flee from the monarchical onslaught of King Harald, who had set about to conquer all of Norway and bring it under a Christian-style monarchy. And perhaps less known, since his deeds against infidels and the religious fanaticism and promotion of Christianity was more visible in the Iberian Peninsula, that's right, more specifically helping the Portuguese in the reconquest, King Sigurd I of Norway, the first Viking to participate in the Crusades. In the future, I would like to speak about King Sigurd I of Norway, but I'm waiting to visit one of the Portuguese castles, which by this time, by this period, was held and controlled by the Muslim. And King Sigurd I and his lads, along with the Portuguese, made a bloody business up there in the name of Christianity. And not satisfied enough, they moved into the Holy Land to participate in the Crusades. That's something for another time, right? These real historical figures were probably the inspiration for Jarl Ker, whose beard is absolutely awesome and I'm jealous, fusing them with the stereotypes about berserkers. Therefore, Jarl Ker and his ilk are represented with dark clothes. By the way, in television series and movies, we have a lot of presentations of leather armor, although it was very rare during the medieval times, and in most cases it never existed, being a type of armor used much later in history. But, well, also portrayed with brutal and sinister behaviors, the typical, stereotypical ideas about berserkir. The series' use of these new types of warriors, which are completely fantasy, was certainly applied to insert the audience into grand dramatic situations and to demonstrate different idealizations about the Nordic past. That much has a certain historical accuracy, at least in relation to the internal conflicts when Norwegian kings started to spread Christianity in Scandinavia by the sword. And it wasn't hard, mind you, since much of the Scandinavian population was already quite familiar with Christianity from an early period, as evidenced by archaeology and especially of the so-called Viking Age graves since the early 9th and 10th centuries for Norway and Sweden, and evidences since at least the 7th and 8th centuries in Denmark. But at a certain moment in the 9th century, since pagans remained alongside Christians, and there were also people who were pagan and Christian all at once, and there was an important and quite balanced religious syncretism actually, but from the 9th century onwards, Norwegian kings really wanted to convert everyone to Christianity, unite under a single religion, and no more pockets of pagans or of people who had all the religions known at that time period and space, including of people who also incorporated in their daily lives several religious elements from other Abrahamic and non-Abrahamic religions. Be that as it may, the character Jarlker does have a certain historical background concerning the religious fanaticism and violent behaviors of early Norwegian kings, but being Christian Berserker doesn't match, especially due to the fact that Berserker were considered, in the sources at least, to be pagan figures, and in Icelandic literary sources their negative connotations are mostly through the Christian religious lens. So for a person to be Christian and Berserker at the same time, it would be an internal conflict of religious morals, values and conduct, and simply doesn't match. Maybe that's what would lead these characters to completely muddle their wits and become maddening beasts. In any case, these artistic reinterpretations of history end up bringing the modern world closer to medieval sources than an actual faithful historical portrayal. All this to tell you that Viking Christian Berserkir or Berserkers is utter tosh, codswallop, absolute rubbish. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this short video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Farewell.